Welcome back to another edition of the Idiots Among Us. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We're on Twitter now. You can follow at Idiots Among. But we need to talk about vaccines. And this is one of those situations where whether you're pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination, you're going to have some strong feelings about it. And if you're 100% on either side of this, your thinking and your education is probably a little bit flawed. With that being said, we also need to address the fact that we're not talking about conspiracy theories here. We're not completely denouncing the science behind inoculation. We're not even going to touch on the autism spectrum. You can go and delve into that study yourself. There's lots of scientific evidence that proves both ways. So I just don't even want to touch that. That's not the point of this video here. The point of this video is because it's become a forefront topic where it's gotten to the point to where they are advocating minors going and getting inoculations or getting vaccinations, I should say, without their parents' consent. They're actually able to do this in about 15 states here in the United States. They're advocating mandatory vaccines by law. It's a very dangerous slope whenever we get into mandating what your health care needs to be. It's also a very dangerous thing whenever you are undermining parental authority in such a way, because, they're saying that you have to be mature enough to make the decision in order to get vaccinated without your parents' consent as a minor. But at the same time, as a minor, you're not going to be as educated as a parent should be. A lot of parents are not as educated as they should be. A lot of adults, period, regardless of the topic, are not as educated as they should be. I'm not perfect. I don't know everything, and I don't pretend to know everything. We're also not going to just be completely dismissive of the science of inoculation. I'm not here to simply fearmonger and tell you, oh my God, you got to stay away from vaccines. Don't you get them? Don't you put them in your children? That's not what we're here for today. So regardless of your stance, take an open mind and listen to what I've got to say here, because this issue has become a black and white issue, and it is very, very much a gray one. With that being said, let's just kind of go ahead and start off with the science of the inoculation itself, going back to about the Revolutionary War times, when the smallpox epidemic was largely affecting the colonial areas, which in turn was affecting the ability to fight against the Britons, or against the British, I should say. It was discovered that taking someone who has already been basically terminally infected with smallpox and removing the disease from the pox itself, and that's an important point, from the pox itself, and putting it through a cut up underneath the skin of a healthy individual. They discovered by doing this, the individual may get a little bit sick, but they weren't getting the full-blown disease. It wasn't becoming a fatal issue. And then after, a little bit of rest and, getting over the initial illness, they were able to go about their lives, even though they're still being exposed to the contaminant, the air, the spreading of the disease, basically by being around other people that contract or have contracted the disease. And the reason that it is important, the way that they did this, is whenever you're exposed to germs, bacteria, viruses, any kind of illness, really, your white blood cells are activated and they start to attack it. So whenever they're taking this, the pus from inside of these poxes that develop on the skin That's a mixture of the disease, the virus itself, as well as the white blood cells. So that virus has been diminished. It's still alive, but it's not at its full capacity. So you're introducing a less threatening version of that virus to the healthy person's body, allowing for their white blood cells to attack and overcome it before it is able to spread. A preemptive attack, you could say. Whenever the white blood cells attack a new foreign anything, whether it's bacteria, virus, germs, whatever, whenever they attack, they build a resistance to it by programming within the membrane, how and what is required to fight this illness. And then that is stored in the body, and it knows whenever it comes in contact with it later on in the future what it needs to do. It's better prepared, it's stronger, all of that good stuff. So by doing this, they were better equipping the body to be prepared to be around this smallpox disease, and that is how it was eventually eradicated. So the science of inoculation itself is not a myth. It's not bogus. It's not some conspiracy theory. It is very much real. The other aspect that we need to consider before really getting into the anti-vax part of this, I guess you could say, I wish somebody would stop their car from going off. But anyways, the anti-vax side of things we'll come to in a little bit. But the other thing I wanted to hit first is the susceptibility to disease and common illnesses and frankly new illnesses that keep coming up that we haven't had experience before. Comes from our way of life, our lifestyle. We live in a day and age where everything is antibacterial, everything is sanitized. There's hand sanitizer everywhere that you go. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it is highly overused. Kids today are being kept inside. They're not allowed to go roam around and play and do stupid things and learn from their own mistakes. Babies are being overly watched by overly concerned parents. And that I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with parents doing this with their intention. It's all because they want what's best for their kid, and it's all because they want their kid to be safe and healthy. But at the same time, by doing these things, they're not being exposed as greatly to bacteria, to germs, to common dirt, allergens, just the actual natural surroundings that a kid, even whenever I was a kid in the 90s, would be subjected to on a regular basis. It was very common whenever I was a kid to be told, go outside and don't come back till dinner. You need to go play. And, we were out there doing God knows what, getting dirty as heck. Just having a good old time. The old saying of, rub dirt in the wound, that actually has a little bit of advice to it, because you're exposing your system and activating those white blood cells to strengthen your own immunity from within. So whenever we eradicate this basic exposure and we minimize what we're able to build our immunity up against as children, it's very important that this is done as children, then we become more susceptible to not only common everyday illnesses, but illnesses that we otherwise would not have been susceptible to at all, because we would have come across these different virus and bacteria and germs as children in small doses, may not have even gotten sick in the first place, so therefore nobody knew it even existed. Maybe you developed a little bit of a cough. Either way, our over concern for sanitization and our over concern for eradicating dirt and filth is actually detrimental to future generations, and we're already seeing that today. Again, I'm not advocating that people just 100% stop, but I am saying that we need to consider these things and make some more educated choices. The same goes for whenever I was a kid and somebody would get chicken pox. It was common practice. And of course, this does not work for any and all disease, because not every disease works this way. But for chicken pox in particular, it's not a life-threatening thing for a child to get chicken pox. Their bodies are very resilient. Their immune systems are very adaptable. So it would be very common to intentionally expose, whenever one person would come down with chickenpox in the neighborhood, other neighborhood kids would get together and go play with them and whatever. And the point was to get them sick so that they were then inoculated. They would go through a week or two of feeling like crap and everything would be better. And then whenever they became an adult, they didn't have to worry about being around the disease because they were naturally inoculated against the disease. Their bodies were no longer susceptible to the illness. Nowadays, we have vaccines for the exact same problem. Fine. I understand that. You got to get your booster shots, and eventually as an adult that will wear off. So my concern in that aspect regarding this one particular disease is that in a generation or two, we're going to see a comeback of chickenpox because it's been eradicated 100% through vaccinations that do not have a lifelong span of effectiveness. And we're going to see an outbreak in adults, and it's going to start killing a lot of people. But, that's just my prediction. That's not a solid, statable fact. Now, let's get into a bit of why people are anti-vaccine and why it has become such a hot button issue. First of all, I was listening to NPR about a week or two ago, and I don't remember if it was the Think program or if it was All Things Considered, but it was definitely one of the two. And they actually brought on a person that delved into the why people are refusing to vaccinate and addressed the fact that, whenever we hear anti-vax, that we automatically assume that these are uneducated people sitting around in their basement reading conspiracy blogs all night. And they said that very much that is not the case. And that's true, it's not the case. In fact, the expert that they had on to explain how we can solve the problem with people being anti-vax actually was forced to say that she was very, very surprised to find out that these are not, uneducated conspiracy people. In fact, they're usually highly educated and usually tend to have more knowledge about vaccines than the average person that just goes, gets the information from their doctor and goes and does what they're told to do without questioning it, because of course that's their healthcare physician. We should listen to them. Unfortunately, they didn't, explain further as to why there are concerns or what those concerns were. Just that they have legitimate concerns. So I want to explain what some of that is. First of all, there's a trust issue. This trust issue comes from a long history of documented fact. Trust in our government. During the Obama administration, trust in our government among the right was at an all-time low. During the Trump administration now, trust in our government amongst the left-hand side is at an all-time low. That people don't trust the government. They don't have a reason to trust the government. I didn't trust the government during Obama, and I don't trust the government during Trump. It's a long history of abuse. I'm not going to sit here and go into, everything the government has ever done. I just want to use one example of MK Ultra. Used to be considered a vast conspiracy theory. The documents are out there. They just recently released more documents that supposedly didn't exist whenever the actual lawsuits against MK Ultra and the CIA were going on. But it is a known fact, well documented, go look it up, that the government, the CIA, was doing experiments where they were exposing unwitting participants, people who did not consent, who did not even know that they were participating in these trials of mind control experimentation by exposing them to LSD, among other psychological and psychotic and hallucinogenic drugs and chemicals. The government was willingly and knowingly exposing these drugs to people that were unwilling, unknowing participants. That alone causes a lot of concern that our government would do this type of thing. Let's look at the Tuskegee experiments and the medical research side of things. There's distrust there too, where they took people of color, black people, and they were victims, or well, not victims, I guess you could say. They had syphilis. And in doing the research, they promised experimental treatments and providing a cure. A lot of these people in this study by the Tuskegee experiments were given placebos. They were unwitting participants of this. They were not told that they would be getting a placebo. They were not told that they were a control group. Regardless of the scientific process, these people were told, we are going to try and treat you and we are going to try and cure you. When that didn't happen at all. They were given placebos and left to die, knowingly left to die without the patient's consent. So there's distrust right there in the medical research field of things. And then you've got Bayer on the pharmaceutical side of things saying that, well, not saying, but being caught sending medication overseas to people that was knowingly contaminated with the AIDS virus. They shipped this over for years before they were caught. And for the sake of profits, rather than, going through everything that they need to get rid of the batch, clean it up, and not be contaminated, they knowingly sent AIDS to foreign countries and caused epidemics. Our government and pharmaceutical companies got caught up in a big scandal of sending live polio viruses overseas in the form of vaccinations, the exact topic that we're talking about, and causing polio outbreaks that they were supposed to be helping fight. So all of this is well-documented fact that creates a distrust. You cannot just blindly follow the narrative that vaccines are great for humanity and they're perfectly safe and you need to go get, this whole list of them and be sure to give them to your baby child. You can't blindly trust this coming from multiple different industries with a long history of abuse and mistrust. With that said, you need to talk to your physicians and make an educated choice. Vaccines are not perfectly safe. There are inserts that come with the vaccines themselves that lay out all of the risks, all of the potential side effects, and there's a long list of them. Let's take Merck with the MMR2 vaccine, for example. Just listing one of the possible side effects is type 2 diabetes. That's a lifelong and potentially threatening illness. I did the research and looked over that pamphlet several years ago, so I don't remember the scientific names of some of the life-threatening side effects that come with it, but there are a few in there as well. Merck has their vaccine inserts published on the internet. Go read it yourself. The other concern with this is the additives, the practice, not necessarily the science of inoculation, but the practice of vaccine production. You've got thimerosal in some of these vaccines, just as, again, one particular example, which is a organomercury compound. And the line that we're given is that Well, you're only being subjected to so many micrograms within a vaccination. So even though this is a deadly additive, the dose that you're receiving is so low that it's not going to cause any problems. It's perfectly safe. Okay, let's take that at face value, that one inoculation is perfectly safe. But what happens whenever you start getting 7, 8, 10, 12, 20 vaccinations, especially whenever you're getting these vaccinations in a close time period of like a month, 2 months apart, 3 months apart? It's a very dangerous thing to have these substances, and it's not just thimerosal. There's a whole list of preservatives and additives that are known to be carcinogenic that are added to these vaccines, but they're done so, just as I explained, in the safety limit of what the FDA approves. That's another issue we'll get to here in just a second. So you've got to be aware of the side effects and the potential hazards of getting these inoculations. Whenever you go to the physician, you need to ask for the inserts. Don't just take it, glance at it, and get the shot, or give the kid your shot. Take that information home, study it, read it over, do some research, and go back and talk to your physician with an informed opinion. Look at the ingredients in these vaccinations. See which ones you need to space out to make sure that you're not getting a overabundance or a buildup within your system or within your child's system that is going to enter the no longer safe levels for any of the ingredients that are put into these inoculations. And just because the FDA says that something is safe, why are we believing that? Let's take Bayer once again. Just bought out Monsanto. Bayer and Monsanto have now merged. Monsanto, of course, being the big GMO company and the big pesticide company that created Roundup and glyphosate. For years, it was passed that glyphosate is perfectly fine. It's not going to cause any problems. They only use it on our food. But here we are now, end of 2018, class action lawsuit sprung up because, oh, look, it causes cancer. But all these people at the March Against Monsanto rallies, going back to 2012, 2013, when that started becoming popular, were labeled crazy conspiracy theorists for telling you this, for telling you glyphosate is a poison, it is carcinogenic, it is put in our food, and it is causing problems. Stop using it in your yard. Stop buying Roundup. Oh, no, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist who once again turned out to be right. Just because the FDA approves something doesn't mean that it's safe. In fact, they have a long history of these class action lawsuits going through because the FDA does not require sufficient safety tests and sufficient scientific documentation. They take the bare minimum, say, okay, let's put it out there and we'll recall it and, pay some lawsuits out. And when people's lives are ruined and people start dying, we'll deal with it then. That has been a long-standing practice of the FDA. So, again, it's a trust issue. Please consider all of this. Consider all of this information. Consider the way that we're making our decisions, and consider looking at the angles in which this argument about whether people should be getting vaccines or not is being presented to you. It is not a black and white issue. I'm not telling you what decision you need to make. I'm telling you every person is different. Every person has different genealogical makeup, biological makeup. Every person is more susceptible to certain things and less susceptible to certain things. I'm telling you that this is a decision that needs to be between you being educated and your physician. If your physician tells you that there is zero risk with a vaccine, find a new physician. He's lying to you. The paperwork that comes with the vaccinations tells you otherwise. Get an honest and fully informed opinion. Decide, which vaccinations are necessary. Which ones do you really need to be getting, at this age or at that age? Which ones are really a concern? As far as disease protections, which ones should you maybe not need to be getting, because there is so much controversy and problems and health effects and side effects from getting that disease, from getting that vaccination. Gardasil being one specifically off the top of my mind is extremely dangerous. It's the HPV vaccination. The flu shot. Look up the CDC. Last time I looked, I think it was like a 22% effective rate. Is that even worth putting these toxic additives into your body? Or is it better to just deal with the flu? Make these decisions yourself, but make them informed. Don't just believe that everything is safe. Don't just believe that everything is bad. This is a scientific and biological topic that needs to be taken with grave concern. No matter what the situation is, it needs to be handled with respect. Stop blaming each other. Stop attacking each other. No matter what your stance is, start listening to one another and start making the valid points that need to be made, regardless of your position, and make that decision for yourself. Nobody else needs to be making that decision for you. Again, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff, and we'll see you soon.